Okay, so Boker Tov, welcome back, everybody. We are continuing. Sof b'sha'ah tova mutzlachat. We had a nice long break for the summer, and it's still summer, but we're back. We're back. So we are on Masechet Beitzah Daf Tet Zayin Amud Aleph. We're near the beginning of Perek Sheni. We're going to talk. Hopefully, we should get there today as well. A few other inyanim which come up on the daf, but we started talking, and we'll carry on talking at great length about the halachot of Eruv Tavshilin. Eruv Tavshilin is very relevant for you this year. The truth is that Eruv Tavshilin comes up just about every year. It comes up in Chutz La'aretz. In Chutz La'aretz, when you have 2 days of Yom Tov, so it's far more common, and in Israel it's less common. But this year we have Rosh Hashanah, as we all know. You've all looked at the calendar, and you all nearly had a heart attack when you saw it. That this year Rosh Hashanah is on Thursday and Friday, so it's 3 days in a row. Don't worry, because in Chutz La'aretz they have 3 days in a row for Rosh Hashanah, and then 3 days in a row for Sukkot, and then 3 days in a row for Shmini Atzeret. We just have to do it once. So, but that is the, but what that means. So when we have Yom Tov on Erev Shabbat, so Friday is Yom Tov, and then Shabbat is Shabbat, obviously. So Shabbat straight after Yom Tov. So we have to do an Eruv Tavshilin. Now, generally speaking, everybody sends out a message on Erev Yom Tov. You see on all the WhatsApp statuses and all the messages, Eruv Tavshilin, Eruv Tavshilin. Don't forget Eruv Tavshilin. And then you say, but what's Eruv Tavshilin? Okay, so that's why we are studying to figure out exactly what it is. As we've already seen in the past, Eruv Tavshilin is a mechanism which will allow us to prepare from Yom Tov to Shabbat. You recall that from Shabbat to Yom Tov, one is not allowed to prepare. On Shabbat, you can't cook anyway. But even for other things, not cooking, right? Lighting candles, which obviously you can't do on Shabbat, but lighting candles, setting the table, any sort of preparation, we know that from one day of Yom Tov to the next, we are not allowed to prepare. So this, again, in Chutz La'aretz, this is far more common because you have 2 days of Yom Tov. Here in Eretz Yisrael, we just have it on Rosh Hashanah. We cannot prepare from the first day of Rosh Hashanah until the second day of Rosh Hashanah. That's why the night of Yom Tov, you have to wait until nightfall before you start putting food on the hot plate, etc. From Yom Tov to Shabbat, that is not the case. Well, the right, it might be the case, but once we have an Eruv Tavshilin, so on Yom Tov itself, we can start preparing, start cooking, start doing everything we need to do for Shabbat. One question comes up, which we'll hopefully address, is nowadays when many people do not cook at all on Yom Tov, you have 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is, but everything is prepared and everything's in the freezer beforehand. Not everybody, right? And it's not, you're not required to do this. You can prepare on Yom Tov itself. But if you've done all the cooking beforehand and you know you won't be doing any cooking at all, would you still make an Erev Tavshilin? Would you still say a bracha? I'll just say at this point quickly that yes, we would still recommend to do an Erev Tavshilin because you need to light candles, you may do other things, etc. Okay, so let's get into the Gemara. Again, before we get back to the dinim of Erev Tavshilin, there's a few other points which the Gemara makes. We're on Daf Tet Zayin Amud Aleph. Tet Zayin Amud Aleph, Masechet Beitzah. And we are about, let's say, a bit after a third of the way down from the page. So where the narrow lines, towards the end of the narrow lines, the last thing we discussed was the concept of the difference between Hillel and Shammai in terms of how they would prepare for Shabbat, and in terms of whether you say Baruch Hashem Yom Yom, whether when you find something nice in the middle of the week, do you set that aside for Shabbat, or do you say, no, we'll have that now and Hashem will provide something nicer before Shabbat? Okay, those were Hillel and Shammai. And now we are in the third last of the narrow lines. Towards the end of the line, it says, Amar Rabbi Chama b'Rabbi Chanina, Hanoten matana lechavero en tzarich lodio. Okay, when a person gives a gift to one's friend, a person gives a gift, you don't have to inform the person that you gave it to them. So you put it somewhere that I don't know. Where do we see this? Shneimar Moshe lo yada ki karan ol panav. Moshe Rabbeinu did not know that there were rays of light coming from his face. When Moshe Rabbeinu came down from Har Sinai, so his face was radiating light. Hashem didn't tell him. And now when he wore a mask. By the way, a famous mistranslation, as everybody knows, so the word keren or means a ray of light. That was famously mistranslated as horns of light. And that's why in Michelangelo's paintings and other, so Moshe Rabbeinu has horns. He did not have horns. He had rays of light coming off his face. Okay, so Meitiveh. However, so there we see Hashem did not inform him, didn't tell him of the gift he had given him. However, we have a challenge. It says in the pasuk, Ladat ki ani Hashem mekadishchem. What's that talking about? That is the pasuk that relates to Shabbat. Right, the full pasuk, if you'll see on the side, is that Tada bera bnei Yisrael emol ach et shabtotai tishmolu Ki oti beini uvenechem ledotechem. Ladat ki ani Hashem mekadishchem. That's talking about I've given you the gift of Shabbat, and it's to know that I am Hashem who is sanctifying you. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe. Moshe, matana tova yesh li beveit Kenazai. It's an expression we see the Gemara in a number of places. Shabbat, other things as well, are referred to as a matana tova, as a great gift. Want to remember that, sometimes you go places and sometimes people have been in homes where, it's on Shabbat. What do? Half the family sits there Shabbat afternoon saying, when Shabbat over, when Shabbat over, when Shabbat over, because you want to go and do this and you want to go and do that. No, that's not the way we should look at it. Shabbat is a matana tova. In any event, matana tova yesh li beit Kenazai v'Shabbat shema. It's called Shabbat. V'ani mvakesh lidna Yisrael. I want to give it to Bnei Israel. Lech v'odiotam. Go and tell them. Go and inform them. That's why it says lada'at. Ladat ki ani Hashem mekadishchem. I'm not just giving you Shabbat. I have to tell you that I'm giving you Shabbat, and I have to tell you what this great gift is. So therefore, we see from here that you do have to tell somebody that you give them a gift. So says the Gemara, Mikan Amar Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel anoten pat latinok tzarich leodia leimo. Right? Says Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, somebody gives a child bread, gives a child some food, right? So you have to go and you have to tell the parents. Nowadays, you certainly have to go and tell, right? But So says the Gemara, lo kasha, right? We have a contradiction from the first part, from the pasuk about Moshe lo yada ki karan ol panav, where Hashem did not tell him, versus by Shabbat. So you do have to tell someone, you don't have to tell someone. So says the Gemara, lo kasha, haba matana David le'egluye, matana lo David le'egluye. It depends. You're giving them a gift which they're going to find out. Ultimately, they're going to know about it, so you don't have to go out of your way to tell them. But if they're not going to find out, so then you do have to. Now, hang on, says the Gemara, Shabbat, Nami matana David legluye. But Shabbat was the example you gave where you have to tell. So Shabbat is obviously David legluye. That's going to be known. Everybody knows, right? You're going to get to Shabbat, and everyone's going to know about it. So Shabbat Nami matana David legluye. Now, says the Gemara, Matan Schala lo David legluye. Right, you may know about Shabbat, you're not going to know about its reward. You're not going to know about its greatness. You're not going to know that it's a matana tova, and therefore Hashem had to Kivyachol had to tell. Okay, continues the Gemara now on the same topic. Amar, we just said the following. Mikan Amar Rashbag anoten pat latinok tzarich leodia leimo. You said Rashbag said the one who gives bread to a child has to tell to inform his parents. So my avidle. So how do you do that? How do you tell them? What do you do? Shaif le mishcha umale le kuchla. Okay, so you would take a little bit of oil, you rub a little bit of oil, you take a little bit of this kuchla, is this blue, like the word kachol. It's this blue sort of makeup, this marking, whatever, and you put a little mark on the child's face. It says male le kuchla, says Rashi. Noten kachol svivot einav. You put this blue like round about his eyes, and then what's going to happen? The child's going to go home, and the mother's going to look at him and going to say, "What's that on your face?" He's going to say, "What are you talking about?" Like, "Oh, that's because so and so gave me a sandwich, right?" And therefore, and that's the way you'll tell. That's the way you'll know. Now, there's a problem with this. Here's the Gemara Va'idna. It says nowadays, the days the Gemara, you can't put this blue around the eyes, this kuchla. Why? Because people are going to think the chashin and l'kshafim. People are going to think this is you're trying to curse them. You're trying to do some sort of magic, right? And that's what they would do in those days, I guess. That's the way it was. So so what do? So amarav papa shaif le meoto hamin. So you take a little bit of the food, you put that on his face. No one's going to think that's kshafim. So the child comes home, he's got a little bit of chocolate on his face. I know kids who have a little bit of chocolate on their face at all times, but it's going to see, and the mother's going to say, "What's that?" So and so gave me a sandwich. Okay, fine. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. One continues. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon. Again, just if you've lost the place, we're about 8 lines down from the beginning of the wide lines. Amar Rabbi Yochanan mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Kol mitzvot shnatan lem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. Natan lem b'farhesia chutz mishabat. All the mitzvot which Hashem gave to Bnei Israel, He gave them in farhesia. He gave them in public, except for Shabbat. Natan lem b'tzinah. Except for Shabbat was given in b'tzinah. It was given privately. Shene'emar, as the pasuk says, Beini uvein Bnei Israel tihi le'olam. It's between me and Bnei Israel. It's not something which is public. This is between us. Oti leolam. There's a sign between us forever. So iachi. So says the Gemara, we have a problem with this. If that's the case, lo le'anshu nochrim alei. Lo le'anshu nochrim alei. If that's the case, then nochrim, the non-Jews, should not be punished for it. Okay, there is an idea, and the Gemara Avodah Zarah talks about, says the other nations of the world will be punished because they were offered the opportunity to fulfill mitzvot, and they did not take it up. Like Shabbat is one of the examples that's given. The famous Gemara over there, many people know, we're coming up to Sukkot, right? So it says regarding Sukkot, as the Gemara Avodah Zarah, it says that Atid Lavo, in the future, the non-Jewish nations of the world are going to come to Hashem and they're going to say, it's not fair. It's not fair. Why do Israel get all this reward? And what about us? What don't we get? And Hashem says, well, they had mitzvot that they kept and you didn't. And they say, okay, well, give us a mitzvah. So Hashem says, okay, I'll give you an easy mitzvah. I'll give you the mitzvah of Sukkah. And it says they get the mitzvah of Sukkah to sit in it, and they all go and they say it's too hot and it's too this, and they all go and they kick down the Sukkah. Okay, that's the Gemara that's the Gemara Avodah Zarah. Obviously, a lot of symbolism and metaphor needs to be understood exactly what's being said. But there is a concept as well that they were punished for not accepting a Shabbat. Now, our Gemara says, but what do you mean? It says Shabbat was given privately to Bnei Israel, so nobody else knew about it. So how can they be punished? So we say Shabbat odinu, matan schara lo odinu. Like what we just said, no, they knew about Shabbat, that they were told about, but they weren't told about the reward of Shabbat. So they didn't know about the reward, so then they didn't. I said, why should why should we accept this thing? We're not going to be able to look at our phones for a whole day. Who wants that? Right? They didn't know that there would be a great reward. Aside from the fact, I'll tell you, by the way, that not being able to look at your phone for a whole day is a great privilege. Not saying to scoff at. Okay. So that's one answer. One answer is they were informed about Shabbat, but they weren't informed about the Matan Schara, about the reward of Shabbat. Ibait Ema, here's an alternative answer. Matan Schara Nam Yodinu. No, they knew about the Matan Schara as well. They knew about the reward also. But Neshama Yetera Lo Odi. They were not told about the Neshama Yetera. They were not told about the additional. How do you translate that? So literally, it means Neshama Yetera means an additional soul. All right, it's not that we get an additional soul. No, we don't become an additional person. There's an additional capacity. Additional capacity for holiness. Maybe we'll see in a moment just how the Rishonim understand this concept of Neshama Yetera. There's an additional capacity for holiness that a person has on Shabbat, an additional depth maybe that one can connect with it in terms of the Neshama. So that they didn't know about. And now, the Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Rish Lakish says, Neshama Yetera noten HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'adam erev Shabbat. Person is given this Neshama Yetera, Hashem gives to a person on erev Shabbat. U'lemotzei Shabbat notlin oto imenu. But it's there for a limited time. Motzei Shabbat comes and it goes away. Shneimar Shabbat vayinafash. Pasuk says, Pasuk dealing with creation of Shabbat, Shabbat vayinafash. So the Gemara learns that here, the word vayinafash, you can read it as Shabbat vay nefesh. Vay is like oi. Right? Kevan Shabbat, once you have Shabbat, once Shabbat is over, vay, oi, woe, avda nefesh. The nefesh is gone. But then the Neshama Yetera is lost. It says Rashi, vayinafash, tarshinan le, oi ala nefesh achala. Oi, woe about the nefesh that is now gone. Now, if you have a look at the previous Rashi, there's a bit of a surprising explanation here, I think, in terms of what the Neshama Yetera means. It says, Neshama Yetera, it says, Rochav lev, limnucha v'lesimcha. You have, I guess, an expansion, literally, Rochav lev, right? An expansion of the heart. But as I said, that extra capacity, right, to rest and to rejoice, right, for simcha. V'liyot patuach levacha, in order to to be open to enjoy yourself, essentially. You'll be able to eat and you'll be able to drink, and it's not too much. It doesn't get disgusting, right? You ever wondered? I mean, you think sometimes about how much we eat on Shabbat versus how much we eat during the week. You know, one course of a Shabbat meal could be enough for for an entire meal or two entire meals during the week. We eat a lot of extra food. Says Rashi, It's a right. The neshama Torah. That's what allows you to eat and drink all the extra food. Okay, it's quite a technical, seems quite a mundane explanation. Obviously, the idea is not just that a person's stuffing themselves, and you'll know full well that if a person stuffs themselves like a glutton, even on Shabbat, the neshama Torah is not going to help you. You'll still feel that, and you'll still pay for that afterwards. But when one's eating and one is drinking and one is celebrating and having a oneg Shabbat and it's done for the spiritual cause, maybe what Rashi is trying to say is that you will be able to derive that physical benefit in a way that it's connected to something high. I know he doesn't say that explicitly, and I'm reading in a little bit into his words, but maybe that's what's behind it. I'll just tell you there is. I saw a quote here from the Shita Mekubetzet. The Shita Mekubetzet writes that the Perush of Neshama Torah means Chal alav shefa eloki v'sechel yoter la'asok b'torah u'la'ayin b'maseh Hashem. That a person has heavenly divine bracha and extra intellect in order to sit and in order to study Torah, in order to examine the ways of Hashem. Right? Sometimes if a person is connected to what they should be connected to, you open up a sefer on Shabbat, and you have a different understanding. You're able to realize things. It's not just the fact that you're on Shabbat, you don't go to work, right? You have a certain menuchat nefesh. That's part of this neshama Torah that allows you to expand in that way as well. Okay, so that's the idea of neshama Torah. Okay, we're about a third of the way from the bottom of the page, maybe a bit more. We now get back to our Mishnah. We now get back to the dinim of eruv tavshilin, which I said are very relevant this year. So, oseh adam tavshil me'erev yom tov. Okay, what is the eruv tavshilin? Eruv tavshilin is you take a food, you take a specified cooked food that you prepare before yom tov. Right? You say the bracha, you lift it up, you say this is the eruv. That's what you do, and you have this cooked food. The custom nowadays that are very often people use an egg or something else. You can use any cooked food is sufficient, and together with a piece of bread or a piece of matzah, right? And that you keep that food, and that has to be there until Yom Tov. If you eat it before Yom Tov, so then comes Yom Tov and it's time to prepare for Shabbat. You don't. The eruv's gone. Well, you have no eruv. You can't do it anymore. So you have to keep it around Yom Tov, and then generally the minhag is that it gets eaten on Shabbat, eaten at Surah Shlishit. Okay, so but we have to have a tavshil. So what is this tavshil? What fulfills the requirement? So the first thing is Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela tavshil, aval patlo. Abaye says, okay, we'll see later on how we pass him, but Abaye says that you can, for your eruv tavshilin, you can have a tavshil. Specifically, you can have a cooked food, but you cannot have bread, right? Tavshil aval patlo. So ma'ishna pat the lo. So why is it? Why do we say that the eruv can't be pat, can't be bread? If you're going to say midi di melafet ba'inan, if you're going to say it's something that you need that is a liftan, that it's a food which accompanies the bread, right? You dip your bread into hummus or matbucha, or you eat it with your schnitzel, whatever it is. If it's a food that accompanies the bread, okay. So and bread does not accompany bread because bread is bread. But daisa, which is sort of a wheat dish, kind of like a thick porridge, which is not a melafet, that is also does not accompany bread. And nonetheless, we're taught that you can use daisa for an eruv tavshilin. Now, what's the proof? First of all, the daisa is not melafet. That does not accompany the bread. The Amar Rabbi Zera, Hanei Bavlai Tipshai. Rabbi Zera says these Babylonians are so tipshim, they're so foolish, they're so silly. The Achle Nehema Benehema, that they eat bread with bread. Rabbi Zera is referring to daisa. Daisa is similar in the sense that it's both wheat and it goes with bread. He's saying you can't eat bread with bread. It's like you're having like a bread sandwich, right? You have although I'm sure that there are some kids sometimes that you find that have all sorts of funny eating habits. Just gone back to school, so we've just passed the 1st of September, so we're back. For those amongst us who are still making aruchot eser and making snacks and foods for the kids to take to school every day, so you find all sorts of strange and interesting concoctions that they come up.
I saw cream of farina or something like that.
Yeah. So, but the point is, you're not going to eat bread with bread. That doesn't work. Apparently, that's what it's saying. That's what they do in Bava. So, but nonetheless, we say that you can use daisa for the eruv. So it can't be that it's not because, again, our question is, why can we not use bread for the eruv according to Abaye? So the other amina is because whatever food you can use for eruv is a food which is melafet etapat, which is accompanies the bread, and bread does not accompany the bread. But daisa also does not accompany the bread, and nonetheless we say that you can use daisa for an eruv. So it must be something else. So here's the second suggestion. Ela mide de lo shachiach ba'inan. You need something, according to this, you need something that is not so common. It's not such a common food. I.e., if you have a food that you always have that's there anyway, the point is the eruv needs to be recognizable. I set aside a specific food. I designated it for the eruv. If it's now a food which is a staple of my house, which I always have there, I always have bread. So I haven't done anything. And therefore, he says, pat is much more common, and daisa is not as common, and therefore you can use daisa for the eruv and not pat for the eruv. Okay, adkan lishna kama. That is one version of this account. Now says the Gemara Ikad Amri. Here is a second version of what Abaye said, and it comes out slightly differently according to this. Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela tafshil. Aval pat lo. Okay, so far the same. Abaye said you can only use a tafshil, use a cooked food, but not pat, not bread. My tama, what's the reason? So here we say like this. Before we started off saying maybe it's because it doesn't accompany the bread. Yeah, in this version we say we go straight to the second reason, which is now the first. So my tama, right? If you're going to say that you need something which is not common, food which is not common, right? And pat is common, bread is common. So ask the Gemara, according to this, are you going to really? Is that correct? That daisa is not such a common food? Ein marvin b'daisa elamidi demelafet bainan. So we say no. Rav Nachum Bar Zechariah says, the name of Abaye, he says we don't do an eruv with daisa. Rather, we only use food which is going to accompany the bread. Okay, so it depends depending on which reason you accept for why you can't. Based on the Lishna Kama or the Lishna Batra, which reason it is why pat cannot be used for the eruv, the nafkamina would be whether daisa can be for the eruv as well. If we say it's because you can't have a food which accompanies, you need a food which accompanies the bread, so that would apply equally to pat and daisa, and that's why we say that can't be used for the eruv. If we say no, it's because you need a food which is common, or food which is not common, so then that would be different. So the difference between the nafkamina between these two versions is whether we say we can use daisa as a part of the eruv or not. Nowadays, probably not so common to use daisa for eruv tafshilin. Like I said, most people use the egg or the schnitzel, the fish, or whatever it is. So the Gemara now goes into a few more details. Sorry, just to finish off, right? So he said, that's what do you mean you're going to eat that along with bread? It's like eating bread with bread. That doesn't make sense. Okay. Tani. 6 lines from the bottom now. Tani Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia says like this. Adashim shebashulei gdera somech alein mishum elvei tavshilin. Okay, this part is very appetizing. Says the Gemara again, we have to remember that when you read through a Gemara like this, and we have to be aware of the shefa, of the bracha, of the plenty that we have in our generation in terms of the, what we have in the kitchen and the amount of food that we have and the pots and pans that we have. Once upon a time, it was all very, very, very different. People did not have entire fridges and freezers stocked up and you have as much food as you want and you throw off the food away. No, it was not like that. You were scraping for every morsel. So not everybody had the ability to prepare an extra dish now, an extra food, or where's it going to come from? So therefore, says Rabbi Chia, the adashim shebushulei akdera. Sometimes when you have lentils that are at the bottom. It can be lentils or rice or different things when you cook, and that are left at the bottom of the pan, right? And you scrape off from the bottom of the pan that he says. So he says those are Hashim that are at the bottom of the pan that you scrape off. That you can use for your eruv tavshilin. That food that can be used. There's one condition, so long as there is a kazayit. So long as there's a kazayit of that is sufficient. That can be used for your eruv tavshilin. Amar Rav Yitzchak Breder Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says something else. Says shamnunich al gabei sakin. So you have the fats of the food that are left on the knife, okay, that you've cut off. He says that that also you can scrape that off and you can use that for your eruv tavshilin. Okay, and once again, so long as there is a kazayit. If it's less than a kazayit, it's not sufficient, it doesn't count as a food. So the lentils you scrape off the bottom of the pot, the fats that you scrape off the side of the knife. So I think from this you get a sense again of what what a kitchen used to look like, what a household used to look like, what food we had, and we can be thankful for the access that we have nowadays. There's something else which comes out of this, which is very, very interesting when you talk about the shamnonit on the sakin. So there's a lot when it comes to Hilchot Kashrut. It's not directly our subject, but it's related. In Hilchot Yisur V'Eter, Basar V'Chalav, etc. So everybody knows there are, there's a masim b'chol yom. You have the meaty spoon and the milky knife and the milky pot and the meaty whatever it is. And there's a lot that's discussed about knives and scraping off the knives and cleaning and transfer of taste. Nowadays, our pots and our cutlery and everything, most of it is stainless steel. And in most of our homes, we've never seen, when a pot is clean, hopefully, you don't have food that's left over and remnants. And, there's a big question. We talk about transfer of taste from meat to milk, from one pot to the next or whatever. But, we don't see it. There's nothing there. And the question is, what's changed? Because even in the days of the Gemara, there were certain materials and certain things they had where the surfaces were very clean and were very smooth. And the question is, so a lot's been written and a lot's been said about whether we have transfer of taste nowadays between the walls of the pots, etc. So a few years ago, Rav Eliezer Melamed Hambracha in Pnei Halacha, this is quite controversial. They got into a lot of trouble for this, but he wrote a sefer on kashrut, and he has a very interesting theory because he says, in the Gemara and in the Rishonim and in the Poskim, we find all these discussions about transfer of taste between utensils and knives and pots, etc. We've never really seen this. So what's different? So there are those who talk about the fact that maybe we have different pots, or maybe we have different food, or things like that. He says his theory, his hypothesis is, what's changed? He says what's changed was the invention of soap, of dishwashing soap, of chemical agent which can clean things. He says nowadays, you clean a knife or whatever, with soap. It's clean, there's nothing left. But going back not so long ago, 200, 300 years ago, right? They went after, there was always residue that was left over. And those who were talking about the grease, the fats that's left on the knives, whatever, when you don't have the soaps, the detergents that we have today, so it's very, very difficult. And that's where you have the discussions about sticking it into hard ground to get things off and everything. So based on that, he has certain implications and certain conclusions he comes to in practical halacha. I will say they're not accepted by everybody. So it was very controversial when he wrote it, but still controversial. But it was an interesting point, interesting food for thought. When we read this and we see these discussions in the Gemara about things that are left over in the pot or left over on the knife, etc. Okay, so that's where we are today. We're near the bottom of Daf Tetzayin. We'll end there. We'll end there for now. Everybody have a wonderful day. And tomorrow, again, we'll pick up at 8:45. So you have an extra 15 minutes to eat your breakfast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.